Before her death, Tammy Wynette finally revealed the 7 musicians she hated most. She sang about standing by your man, but who stood by her? Tammy Wynette, the fragile siren of country music, lived a life etched in heartbreak, scandal, and silence. Her voice was soft, her image saintly. But as the curtain began to fall in her final years, she confessed the truth she'd carried for decades. 7 names, 7 fellow musicians she loathed. Some with good reason, others with wounds only she could explain. One was a rival, one a betrayer, one a monster with a smile. Why did Tammy Wynette keep these enemies hidden until the very end? Let's find out. 1. The queen with a knife behind her back, Loretta Lynn. They called them the twin pillars of country royalty. Tammy Wynette and Loretta Lynn. 2 women, 2 voices, 2 faces that defined the genre's golden age. But while the cameras captured staged sisterhood and award show embraces, the truth simmered beneath the surface. Tammy Wynette hated Loretta Lynn. It wasn't always that way. In the late 60s, Tammy idolized Loretta, the coal miner's daughter who rose from poverty to stardom on pure grit. Loretta wrote her own songs, sang about birth control and broken homes. She was raw, real, and fearless. Everything Tammy wasn't allowed to be. When Tammy's Stand By Your Man skyrocketed to fame in 1968, it divided the country world. Critics called it a betrayal of feminism. Fans either wept or raged. And Loretta? Loretta laughed. In interviews, she publicly teased Tammy's biggest hit, calling it outdated, even silly. Privately, according to several Nashville insiders, she told colleagues Tammy had no business talking about marriage when she couldn't keep one. Worse, Loretta allegedly began telling a story, one she would later repeat in interviews with a smirk, about Tammy collapsing backstage before a show and crying over her 5th divorce. "That poor girl lives in a soap opera," Loretta reportedly said, "but she sure can cry on cue." Tammy was devastated. In public, she stayed silent. There were no rebuttals, no interviews, just a forced smile whenever Loretta's name was mentioned. But behind the scenes, friends say Tammy viewed Loretta as a saboteur, a woman who used her charm to undercut other women, especially those who threatened her crown. Their rivalry never exploded in tabloids. There were no slaps or shouting matches, just a cold war fought with rumors, rolled eyes, and subtle jabs buried in song dedications. By the 1990s, Tammy's health was declining. The press had moved on, but one name still made her flinch. According to her longtime hairdresser and confidant, when asked in a whispered conversation who had hurt her most in Nashville, Tammy didn't hesitate. "Loretta," she said. She smiled while she cut me. That name was the first she wrote down. 2. The Svengali who pulled her strings, Billy Sherrill. Billy Sherrill made Tammy Wynette a star. That much is true, but Tammy never forgot the price. Sherrill was a producer, one of the most influential architects of the Nashville sound. When he discovered Tammy in 1966, she was a single mother working as a hairdresser, begging for studio time. He saw something in her, the trembling vulnerability, the haunted eyes, the desperation she didn't bother to hide. He signed her, shaped her, mapped out her voice, her image, even her heartbreak. Together, they created Stand By Your Man. It became her anthem and his masterpiece. But as Tammy's fame soared, her autonomy vanished. Billy controlled every part of her career, what she sang, how she dressed, who she spoke to. He insisted she wear white on album covers to project purity. He told her to lean into sorrow. "Pain sells, Tammy," he once said, according to a close friend. "So cry for them," Tammy cried, not just in songs, but in dressing rooms, studio corners, and hotel bathtubs. She felt like a puppet, her life curated for commercial tragedy. There were darker whispers, too. Tammy allegedly claimed Billy refused to let her record certain songs unless she agreed to personal favors, that he exploited her dependence on medication, that he played God with her image, only to abandon her when younger, flashier stars emerged. In the mid-'80s, they stopped working together. Publicly, the split was amicable. Privately, Tammy was furious. She felt discarded, used. betrayed by the man who knew her deepest pain and turned it into vinyl. In 1997, just a year before her death, Tammy spoke to a close friend about her legacy. She expressed regret, not for the fame, but for the price she paid to achieve it. "Billy built me like a house," she whispered, "and when he was done living in it, he burned it down." His name was the second on her list. 3. The outlaw who called her a fraud, Waylon Jennings. In the rebel-drenched era of outlaw country, Waylon Jennings reigned like a king. He was wild, magnetic, and unapologetic. Everything Nashville's polished stars pretended not to be. And to Tammy Wynette, he was poison. At first, she admired him. Waylon stood for artistic freedom. He wrote his truth, lived hard, fought the label machine she had spent years trying to please. But that admiration didn't last. In 1977, after Tammy collapsed on tour and canceled several shows, Waylon publicly called her out in a radio interview. "Some people cry wolf," he said. "Some people cry for attention. And some folks just cry." It was a thinly veiled jab, and everyone in Nashville knew who it was aimed at. Waylon had long mocked Tammy's public image. He thought her sorrow was staged. He told friends she played the victim too well, that her voice cracked in just the right places, not because she felt it, but because she was trained to. He even joked that her greatest hits album should be titled Tammy's Tragedies. But his most brutal attack came off-air. At a private industry event in the early 80s, Waylon reportedly cornered Tammy at a bar and told her she was country music's best actress. He smiled. She didn't. Tammy never retaliated. She didn't fire back in interviews. She didn't write diss tracks. She just remembered. In her final years, her family said she kept a handwritten note tucked inside an old lyric book. 7 names, 7 hurts she never healed. Waylon's was written in red ink, because for Tammy, he didn't just insult her talent, he laughed at her pain. And that, to her, was unforgivable. 4. The mistress who took more than her man, Tanya Tucker. Tammy Wynette had lived through enough betrayal to fill a dozen country albums, but nothing stung deeper than the woman who looked her in the eyes, smiled sweetly, and then stole her world. Tanya Tucker was just 13 when she exploded onto the country scene. Wild, precocious, and already a heartbreaker, she quickly gained a reputation for being as bold off stage as she was on. Tammy was fascinated by her at first. In Tanya, she saw a younger version of herself, minus the fear. But admiration quickly turned to suspicion, then fury. It began in the late 1970s, during Tammy's collapsing marriage to George Ritchie, her 5th husband and longtime manager. Their union had always been controversial. Rumors swirled that Ritchie was controlling, manipulative, and unfaithful. Tammy was often sick, isolated, and visibly deteriorating under his watch. Enter Tanya. She and Ritchie crossed paths at a benefit concert. Tanya was radiant, unapologetic, and, as it turned out, not discreet. According to close friends of Tammy's, she received an anonymous call months later, a woman's voice saying, "Your husband's been with Tucker. Ask him about Atlanta." Tammy did. Ritchie denied it. Tanya never addressed it. But in backstage whispers and industry lounges, the affair was treated as fact. One witness claimed to have seen the two of them practically attached at a Nashville after-party, long after Tammy had gone home, sedated and alone. But the betrayal wasn't just personal. It was professional. Tanya began working with some of the same producers and stylists Tammy had relied on for years. She recorded in the same studios, flirted with the same press. And when asked in a cheeky interview whether she looked up to Tammy, Tanya smirked and said, "She made standing by your man look exhausting. I'd rather stand alone." Tammy was devastated and livid. She felt mocked, undermined, replaced by a younger, louder version of herself. One who didn't just sleep with her husband, but dismissed everything Tammy stood for. In one of her last conversations with a confidant, Tammy said, "She didn't just take him, she took the knife and twisted it." Tanya Tucker's name was the 4th on her list, not because she was a threat, but because she was a wound, one that never fully closed. 5. The clone who tried to replace her, Lori Morgan. In the twilight of her career, Tammy Wynette watched a new wave of country women rise. Glossy, youthful, and carefully packaged by Nashville's next generation of Svengalis. But one name cut deeper than the rest. Lorrie Morgan. She was beautiful, tragic, and marketable. She sang about sorrow, dressed like a porcelain doll. And, most infuriating to Tammy, was often called the next Tammy Wynette. It was a comparison that thrilled Lorrie and destroyed Tammy. Their paths crossed frequently in the late 80s and early 90s, as both women navigated the politics of a shifting industry. Tammy, then in her 40s and frequently hospitalized, struggled to keep up with the demands of touring. Lorrie, meanwhile, was ascending, bolstered by a sympathetic backstory, a string of hits, and strategic press that painted her as a torchbearer for classic country tragedy. What the headlines didn't say, Lorrie was reportedly coached to emulate Tammy. The vocal inflections, the stage poses, even the backstage fragility. Industry insiders whispered that producers told her, "Give them Tammy," without the baggage. Tammy took notice. She saw Lorrie as a manufactured duplicate, one who reaped the rewards of Tammy's pain without living it. It wasn't just professional jealousy, it was erasure. At an awards show in 1994, both women appeared backstage for photos. A young reporter asked Lorrie what it was like to be compared to Tammy. Lorrie smiled, looked Tammy in the eye, and said, "She laid the foundation, but I built the house." Tammy never forgot it. She later told a close friend, "She walks through doors I had to break down with my face." By the time Tammy's final performances came around, often wheeled on stage in pain, lips trembling through rehearsed medleys, she would often glance at the crowd and ask softly, "Do they even know who I am anymore?" Lorrie Morgan's name appeared on the list not because she hurt Tammy directly, but because she represented everything Tammy feared: replacement, reinvention, and the rewriting of her own legacy. 6. The Angel Who Turned Away, Dolly Parton. Of all the names on Tammy Wynette's secret list, this one shocked those who knew her best, because for years, the public saw Tammy and Dolly as kindred spirits, two icons of a generation, bonded by talent, tragedy, and Tennessee roots. But Tammy's final truth? She felt abandoned by Dolly. Their friendship was always more symbolic than intimate. They toured together briefly, sang in harmony on television specials, appeared side by side in photo ops. But behind the rhinestones, their relationship was strained. Tammy struggled, always, with pain, physical, emotional, and professional. She needed allies. She needed women who could challenge the men who silenced her. And for a time, she believed Dolly could be that. Dolly, however, was ascending into superstardom. Movies, talk shows, crossover hits. She had her own empire to protect. In the early 1990s, Tammy's health sharply declined. She was battling addiction, depression, and financial instability. According to family members, she reached out to Dolly, asking for help with a hospital benefit concert. Dolly declined. There was no public fallout, no press release, just a slow, quiet distancing. Later that year, Tammy watched an interview where Dolly, when asked about the state of female country legends, said, "Some of us found ways to rise above it. Some just stayed stuck in the pain." Tammy took it personally. She felt Dolly had turned her back on the past and on her. In private conversations, she referred to Dolly not with anger, but sadness. "She had wings," Tammy said, "but she wouldn't carry anyone." When assembling her final list, Dolly's name was written last and lightly, not underlined, not circled, but present. Because in the end, Tammy didn't hate Dolly for what she did. She mourned her for what she didn't do. 7. The voice she loved and feared, George Jones. Tammy Wynette never stopped singing with George Jones, even after the bruises, even after the divorce, even after the drinking, the cheating, and the destruction. She kept his voice beside hers. But love is a cage when the door is left open too long. They were country's ultimate couple. Their duets, electric. Their chemistry, undeniable. But their marriage? A car crash set to vinyl. George Jones was brilliant, but he was also dangerous. Alcohol turned him cruel. Fame made him paranoid. And Tammy, caught between admiration and terror, kept forgiving him until she couldn't. She filed for divorce in 1975, citing mental cruelty. The papers were sealed. The stories weren't. He once chased her through a hotel lobby screaming. Another time, he locked her in a room to prevent her from leaving a tour. She was hospitalized multiple times during their marriage. Stress-induced ulcers, panic attacks, unexplained injuries. Still, the industry loved their pairing. Audiences demanded more duets. Producers pushed them back into the studio. Tammy complied, not because she wanted to, but because the image of George and Tammy was more valuable than the woman inside it. Years later, when asked if she still loved George, Tammy replied, "I love his voice. That's all I can handle." And yet, even in her private reckoning, she never accused him publicly, never named him as her abuser, just as someone she never fully escaped. But on her list, the infamous one she left behind, George Jones's name sat in the center. It wasn't scrawled in rage. It was etched in grief. Because sometimes the deepest hatred is saved for the people we loved too much, too long. In the end, Tammy Wynette's list wasn't about vengeance. It was about memory, a fragile woman reclaiming her truth after a lifetime of silence. These weren't just enemies. They were chapters in a story she was never allowed to narrate until the very end. Who else's truth remains unwritten? Subscribe for more.